Ethan Graves believed in order. His life was built on carefully laid out schedules, strict rules, and an unshakable work ethic that had made him one of the youngest, most successful CEOs in the city. His company, Graves Enterprises, ran like a well-oiled machine, and he tolerated no room for errors or distractions. Which was why he was on the verge of firing his new assistant. Standing in his massive corner office, Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose as he listened to his head of HR, Martin, ramble on about why this particular assistant was a perfect fit for the role. "She has an impressive skill set, sir," Martin insisted. "Quick thinker, adaptable, and great at managing crises." Ethan leveled him with a cold stare. "And yet, she cannot follow a simple instruction to bring my coffee without spilling it." As if summoned by his irritation, the office door swung open without a knock. Ava Carter strolled in, a cup of coffee in one hand, a stack of files in the other, and not a single ounce of remorse on her face. Her dark brown hair was tied up messily, her blue eyes sparkled with something that could only be described as mischief, and her lips curled into an amused smile as she set the coffee on his desk. "Black. No sugar. Extra hot. I triple-checked," she said, folding her arms. "I even prayed over it so the caffeine gods would bless you with patience." Ethan inhaled sharply. Patience. The one thing she seemed determined to test. "You're late," he said coolly, ignoring the amused snort from Martin. Ava tilted her head. "Technically, I'm early. You said the meeting starts at 8, and it's 7:59. She tapped her wristwatch. "Unless you're running on some alternate CEO time?" Ethan exhaled through his nose, his grip on control tightening. "Punctuality means being ready before the time. Not exactly on the second." She shrugged. "Noted, bossman. Now, what's the crisis today?" Martin wisely excused himself, leaving Ethan to face the hurricane that was Ava Carter alone. He studied her for a long moment, analyzing, no, scrutinizing, the way she stood there, utterly unaffected by his presence. Most employees barely held his gaze. Ava met his eyes head-on, without an ounce of fear. It irritated him. It intrigued him. With a measured tone, he said, "Your job is simple. Handle schedules, manage correspondence, and do what I ask without backtalk." Ava placed a hand over her heart dramatically. "So, basically be a robot."
"Got it."
Ethan clenched his jaw.
"No."
"Just be professional." Ava smirked. "Professionalism is overrated. Efficiency is what matters." He narrowed his eyes. "Are you implying that I lack efficiency?" She gave him an innocent look. "I'm implying that maybe you should try being human once in a while." A muscle in his jaw twitched. This woman was insufferable. And yet, a small part of him, buried beneath years of discipline and control, found her unpredictability oddly refreshing. She was different. And that was dangerous. Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers laced together as he regarded Ava with an unreadable expression. "Being human doesn't pay the bills," he said flatly. Ava arched a brow. "Neither does being a robot. But at least humans enjoy their coffee." She nodded toward the untouched cup on his desk. "You should try it before it gets cold." "That would be a tragedy." He gave her a deadpan look. "The only tragedy here is your inability to follow instructions without commentary." Ava grinned. But my commentary makes life more interesting, don't you think?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. "Miss Carter." "Ava," she corrected. "We see each other every day, boss man. No need for the formality."
His eye twitched.
"Miss Carter," he repeated firmly. "If I wanted amusement, I would hire a comedian. I expect efficiency. And I expect a thank you for the coffee I didn't spill this time," she countered, crossing her arms. A silence stretched between them. Ethan reached for the cup, taking a slow sip. It was exactly how he liked it. He set it down, meeting her gaze. "You want a thank you?" Ava nodded. "It's only fair. I mean, I did put in all that effort." He leaned forward slightly. "You work for me, Miss Carter. A thank you is not part of the job description." She tapped her chin, pretending to consider.
"Hmm.
Maybe I should have HR added in." right under deal with Mr. Graves' grumpiness on a daily basis. Ethan exhaled slowly. Do you ever stop talking? Ava beamed.
Nope.
That's why I make such a great assistant. Keeps you from brooding too much. I don't brood. You totally brood, she said, tilting her head. Like if brooding were an Olympic sport, you'd have a gold medal. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose again. Why are you like this? She shrugged. Natural talent. The way she said it, so effortlessly, so boldly, made his lips twitch, almost betraying a smirk. Almost. He quickly masked it with another sip of coffee. Ava, however, caught it. Her eyes gleamed with victory. Was that? No way. Was that a smile, Mr. Graves? Ethan immediately schooled his expression. You're imagining things. Ava gasped, placing a hand over her chest dramatically. I knew you were secretly human. Get out of my office. She grinned, spinning on her heel toward the door. Gladly, boss man. Oh, and don't forget, staff dinner tonight. I already RSVP'd for you. Ethan frowned. I never agreed to that. Ava shot him a wink over her shoulder. You would have said no, so I saved us both time. Before he could protest, she was gone, leaving behind nothing but the lingering scent of vanilla and coffee. Ethan stared at the door, then at his coffee. Damn it. He wasn't supposed to find her amusing. And yet, this was going to be a problem. Ethan Graves had a problem. A 5'4", sharp-tongued, reckless problem named Ava Carter. It had been a week since she started working for him, and instead of bending under the pressure like every other assistant before her, she thrived in the chaos. Worse, she created it. She had a habit of rearranging his schedule when she thought his meetings were too boring. She talked back, challenged his decisions, and once, she even dared to yawn in the middle of one of his presentations. But what was most concerning? She was good at her job. Too good. Which made it all the more infuriating that she was currently ignoring his very clear instructions. Ethan stormed out of his office, scanning the floor for his infuriating assistant. Where is she? He asked a passing employee. The man pointed toward the break room. She's, conducting an emergency meeting, sir. Ethan frowned. Emergency meeting? With a sinking feeling, he strode toward the break room. The moment he stepped inside, he was met with a scene that nearly made his eye twitch. Ava sat cross-legged on the counter, holding a marker like a professor giving a lecture. Half a dozen employees sat around her, nodding in agreement as she pointed at the whiteboard behind her. On it, in bold, black letters, were the words, How to Survive the Ice King, a guide to working under Mr. Graves. Ethan's patience snapped. Ava. Silence fell over the room. The employees scattered like frightened rabbits, but Ava? She simply turned, blinking at him with complete innocence. Oh, hey, boss man, she said casually. You're just in time for the Q&A session. Ethan folded his arms, his jaw tight. Care to explain why my assistant is leading a support group against me? She tapped the marker against her chin. It's not against you. Think of it as an educational seminar. A seminar.
She grinned. Yep.
Your employees were struggling to figure you out, so I gave them a cheat sheet. You should be thanking me. Ethan inhaled deeply, trying and failing to control the growing headache she caused. Miss Carter, my office. Now. Ava hopped off the counter, unfazed. All right. No need for the scary CEO voice. She followed him back, strolling in like she owned the place. Ethan shut the door, turned to her, and exhaled. What the hell was that? He demanded. She shrugged. Team bonding exercise. Team. Ethan ran a hand down his face. You are my assistant, not my company morale officer. Ava propped her hands on her hips. You say that, but let's be honest, boss. If I don't boost morale, who will? The break room has the energy of a funeral home. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, then met her gaze with cool precision. You don't follow instructions, you talk too much, and now you're turning my employees against me. Not against you, she corrected. They just needed survival tips. A survival guide, Ava? His voice dropped, dangerously low. I am not a dictator. She tilted her head. You kind of are, though. Ethan stepped closer, closing the space between them. Do you enjoy testing my patience? Ava smirked. A little. He didn't miss the way her breath hitched slightly as he invaded her space, nor the flicker of something in her eyes. Challenge? Amusement? Something else entirely? He should step back. But he didn't. Instead, he studied her. The way her lips curled mischievously, the way her pulse fluttered at the base of her throat. For the first time in a long while, someone wasn't intimidated by him. And that was dangerous. He exhaled, finally taking a step back. If you're done with your antics, get back to work. Ava gave him a mock salute. Aye, aye, Captain. And just like that, she waltzed out of his office, leaving behind a mess of thoughts he didn't want to entertain. This woman was going to drive him insane. The worst part? He wasn't sure he minded. Ethan prided himself on control. Control over his business. Control over his employees. Control over his own emotions. But ever since Ava Carter walked into his life, that control had started slipping, one sarcastic comment, one reckless stunt at a time. And now, as he sat in a critical investors' meeting, he found himself distracted by her. Ava stood at the side of the conference room, flipping through files like she wasn't the biggest nuisance in his life. But Ethan noticed every little thing about her, the way she twirled her pen absent-mindedly, the way she chewed on her lip while concentrating, the way her fingers tapped a steady rhythm against the table. She was completely unaware of the effect she had on him. And that made it worse. Mr. Graves? Ethan snapped his attention back to the room, where one of the investors was watching him expectantly. Damn it. Ava caught his slip-up immediately. He saw it in the slight arch of her brow, the amused glint in her eyes as if she knew. Straightening his tie, he cleared his throat. Continue. The investor resumed his presentation, but Ethan barely heard a word. He felt Ava's stare on him, almost as if she were testing how far she could push him without saying a single thing. It was infuriating. It was fascinating. And it was unacceptable. By the time the meeting ended, Ethan was already at his limit. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with sharp precision. Ava, my office.
Now.
She didn't even look concerned. If anything, she seemed delighted. Lead the way, boss man. The moment they stepped into his office, Ethan shut the door behind them. You're testing my patience. Ava plopped down on the couch, completely unfazed. I'm not doing anything. That's the problem. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. You exist in the most distracting way possible. Her lips twitched. Are you saying I'm a distraction, Mr. Graves? Ethan exhaled sharply. You know exactly what I mean. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. No, actually I don't. Care to elaborate? His jaw clenched. This woman had no idea how dangerously close she was to pushing him past his limits. He stalked forward, closing the space between them until she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He braced his hands on either side of her, caging her in. Her breath hitched. Finally. For once, she wasn't running her mouth. This is what I mean, he said lowly. The way you challenge me. The way you refuse to listen. The way you look at me like you're waiting for me to snap. Ava's eyes searched his, and for the first time since she walked into his life, she didn't have a quick-witted comeback. Silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. Then, just as quickly, she smirked. Oh, she whispered, her voice teasing but her eyes giving away something else entirely. I think you like the challenge. Ethan's grip on the desk tightened.
He did.
And that was the real problem. Ethan should have stepped away. He should have put distance between them, shut down whatever this was, and reminded Ava of her place as his assistant. But she was right. He did like the challenge. And that made her dangerous. His gaze dropped to her lips for half a second before he forced himself to move away, turning his back to her. Get back to work, Ava. His voice was sharp, clipped. For the first time, she hesitated. He heard the shift in her breathing, the unspoken words she almost let slip. But then, just like always, she bounced back. As you wish, boss man. Ethan didn't turn around until he heard the door click shut behind her. Damn her. Damn him. Hours later, Ethan was still trying to get Ava out of his head when his office phone rang. "Sir, we have a problem," his head of finance, Mr. Calloway, said. "The investors from this morning's meeting are pulling out." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened.
What?
They weren't convinced about the numbers. They're requesting another meeting to clarify financial projections, or they're walking. Ethan swore under his breath. "We don't have the finalized reports yet," Calloway continued. "There's no way we can prepare everything in time." Ethan was already calculating his options when a second voice cut in. "Actually, we can."
Ava.
Ethan looked up as she stepped into his office, a folder in her hand and confidence in her stance. Calloway hesitated. "Miss Carter, this isn't. I've already reviewed the projections and cross-referenced them with market trends." She handed Ethan the folder. "The numbers hold up. The investors just need to see it clearly." Ethan flipped through the documents. His brows furrowed. This was thorough. "Where did you get these?" he asked. Ava smirked. "I made them." Calloway scoffed. "With all due respect, Miss Carter, you're an assistant, not a financial analyst." Ava's smirk didn't waver.
True.
"But I also listen when people talk." She turned to Ethan. "You needed these reports, so I made sure you had them. If you present this data with confidence, they'll stay." Ethan studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. He had underestimated her.
Badly.
"You're sure about this?" Ava grinned. "I wouldn't have barged in if I wasn't." Ethan exhaled through his nose. Then, to Calloway, he said, "Schedule the meeting." Calloway blinked. "Sir." "Do it." Ava shot him a wink before walking out like she hadn't just saved the company millions. Ethan watched her go, torn between irritation and something far more dangerous. His assistant was more than just a distraction. She was becoming indispensable. And that was the biggest problem of all. Ethan was many things, ruthless, calculating, and completely in control. But right now, he was facing a crisis he had never encountered before. Ava Carter was becoming irreplaceable. And worse, he didn't hate it. After her last-minute save with the investors, the deal was back on track. The board was pleased, the financial team grudgingly impressed, and Ethan was left with a growing problem he didn't know how to handle. Because the more Ava proved her worth, the more he realized how much he didn't want to lose her. Which was why, when she strolled into his office the next morning like she hadn't just saved his company millions, he did something completely out of character. He rewarded her. The unexpected reward. Ava dropped a stack of papers on his desk. "Here's the revised schedule, boss man. I trimmed the unnecessary meetings so you don't die of boredom before lunch." Ethan barely glanced at the papers. Instead, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sleek, black envelope. He held it out to her. "This is for you." Ava blinked. "What's this? A termination letter?" Ethan's lips twitched. "Open it." She narrowed her eyes suspiciously, but took the envelope. Carefully, she slid out the contents and froze. Her head snapped up.
"Wait.
"Are these?" "VIP tickets to the charity gala," Ethan confirmed, "with an all-access pass." Ava stared at him. "This is the charity gala. The one with free champagne, overpriced art, and celebrities pretending to care about the environment." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I believe the term is networking opportunity." Ava looked down at the tickets, then back at him. "You never take an assistant to these events." "That's because my previous assistants weren't you." The words hung between them, heavier than he intended. For once, Ava didn't have a quick retort. Instead, she studied him like she was trying to figure out what game he was playing. "So let me get this straight," she said slowly. "I mess up your schedule, run a survival guide behind your back, and almost make your investors walk, but this is what gets me a reward?" Ethan smirked. "You also saved a multi-million-dollar deal and proved yourself more competent than half the board." Ava tapped the tickets against her palm. "And what's the catch?" "No catch." Ethan's gaze locked onto hers. "Just a thank you." Something flickered in her expression, something unreadable. Then, in typical Ava fashion, she grinned. Well, looks like someone is starting to appreciate me." Ethan didn't reply, because the truth was, he wasn't starting to appreciate her. He already did. And that was dangerous. The night of the gala arrived sooner than expected. Ethan wasn't sure what he had anticipated, but when Ava walked through the grand ballroom doors in a sleek, midnight blue dress, his carefully built control cracked. For a split second, he forgot how to breathe. Gone was the sarcastic, reckless woman who spent her days testing his patience. In her place was someone effortlessly elegant, someone who turned heads without even trying. And the worst part? Ethan hated the way other men were looking at her. Ava strolled up to him, smirking. "If I'd known all it took to make you speechless was a dress, I would have worn one to work." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Don't push your luck, Carter." But she already had. And soon, the night would prove just how much. Ethan Graves had spent years perfecting the art of control.
But tonight, he was losing it.
Ava Carter was a walking contradiction, reckless yet capable, exasperating yet irreplaceable. And now, in that midnight blue dress, she was also dangerous. Because every man in the room was looking at her. And Ethan hated it. Ethan wasn't the only one who noticed Ava's transformation. As they moved through the grand ballroom, an all-too-familiar voice cut through the crowd.
"Ethan."
"Always a pleasure." Ethan barely resisted the urge to sigh. Daniel Mercer. His biggest business rival and an insufferable pain in the ass. Daniel's gaze flickered to Ava, and a slow smirk spread across his face. "And who is this?" Ava raised a brow. "Ava Carter. Ethan's assistant." Daniel extended a hand. Daniel Mercer. Entrepreneur, investor, and most importantly, a firm believer in poaching talent. Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's not available." Ava chuckled, shaking Daniel's hand. Tempting offer, though. Daniel's smirk widened. "I'm sure we could work something out." His eyes gleamed with amusement as he glanced at Ethan. "Unless, of course, someone has a reason to stop you." Ava tilted her head, clearly enjoying the game. "Well, boss man? Do you?" Ethan clenched his fist. She was testing him. And damn it, she knew it. Something possessive burned in his chest, and before he could stop himself, he reached for her hand, claiming it. "She works for me," Ethan said coolly. "And that's not changing." Ava's lips parted slightly. Daniel raised his brows in amusement. "Well then," Daniel said with a smirk. "I suppose I'll have to find another brilliant mind to steal." He tipped his glass toward Ava. "If you ever reconsider, you know where to find me." With that, he walked away, leaving behind a tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Ava glanced at their joined hands. Then, slowly, she looked up at Ethan. "So," she mused, her voice teasing yet unreadable. "Was that business, or something else?" Ethan exhaled sharply, forcing himself to let go. "Don't push it, Carter." But Ava just smiled. Because they both knew. The line between business and something else was already blurring. And soon, there would be no going back. The gala had been a game. A test of boundaries. But Ethan had just lost. Because when Daniel Mercer made his move on Ava, Ethan had reacted, claimed her, as if she belonged to him. And she had noticed. Now, as the night came to an end, she wasn't letting it go. "You never answer my question." Ava's voice was light, but there was an edge to it. Ethan glanced at her as they walked to his car. "What question?" She smirked. "Was that little display back there business or something else?" Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. Because the answer was too dangerous. Ava sighed, crossing her arms. "You're impossible, you know that?" He smirked. "So I've been told." She shook her head, her expression unreadable. "You do realize this can't continue, right?" Ethan's smirk faded. "What do you mean?" Ava exhaled, rubbing her temples. The whatever this is, between us? It's not professional. And you're you. The workaholic CEO who probably breathes stock reports in his sleep. And I'm me. You're my assistant," Ethan said firmly. Ava looked up, her gaze sharp.
"Exactly."
"Which is why I should quit." The words hit harder than they should have. For a man who prided himself on being unreadable, Ethan felt the impact like a punch to the gut. "No," he said immediately. Ava blinked. "Excuse me? I won't let you quit." She huffed a laugh. "You can't force me to stay." Ethan stepped closer. Watch me. Her breath hitched, but she didn't back down. And why exactly do you care? The answer was simple. Because he couldn't imagine his days without her sharp wit, her reckless confidence, her ability to challenge him in ways no one else dared. Because she wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was the only thing that had ever made him feel something real. Ethan didn't think. He just acted. Closing the space between them, he tilted her chin up and kissed her. Ava froze. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she melted into him. Her hands gripped his jacket, pulling him closer. His fingers tangled in her hair, deepening the kiss, claiming her the way he'd wanted to from the moment she walked into his office. By the time they broke apart, she was breathless. So, she murmured, voice slightly dazed. That answers that question. Ethan smirked. Finally. A moment of silence from you. Ava rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. You're insufferable. And you're mine, Ethan said without hesitation. She stilled. Then, slowly, she grinned. Well, she teased, looping her arms around his neck. As long as there's a raise involved. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You'll be the most overpaid assistant in history. Ava smirked. Damn right. And as he kissed her again, Ethan realized something. Control had never really mattered. Because with Ava, chaos had never felt so right. 6 months later, Ava Carter was still working at Graves Enterprises. But she was no longer just an assistant. She was his. And everyone in the company knew it. I knew it, Lisa from HR whispered excitedly as Ava walked past. I told you, they were secretly together. I don't believe it, a junior analyst muttered. Graves? In love? No way. Ava smirked as she set her coffee down on her desk. Let them talk. Because while the office was still reeling from the revelation that their cold, untouchable CEO was very much taken, Ava was busy doing what she did best, running Ethan's life and keeping him on his toes. Speaking of which, a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. Ava. She looked up to see Ethan standing at her desk, arms crossed, expression unreadable.
She grinned.
Yes, boss. Ethan exhaled through his nose. We agreed that if you stayed, you'd take an official role in the company. I do have an official role, she said innocently. He arched a brow. Executive assistant is not a real promotion. She batted her lashes. But it means I still get to mess with your schedule. Ethan leaned down, hands on her desk. I'm giving you 2 options, he murmured. 1, you accept the promotion to Chief Strategy Officer and finally take on the power you deserve. Ava hummed. And option 2? His smirk was slow, dangerous. I fire you. She gasped dramatically. You wouldn't. Try me. Ava studied him for a moment, then sighed.
Fine.
But if I'm taking the job, I demand perks. Ethan's smirk deepened. Like. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her palm. Longer lunch breaks. A private office. And at least 2 vacation days that don't involve you dragging me on business trips disguised as romantic getaways. Ethan chuckled. Deal. Ava held out a hand. Shake on it, Graves? Instead of shaking her hand, Ethan pulled her close, brushing his lips against her ear. I have a better way to seal the deal, he murmured. Ava shivered. Then, grinning, she pulled him down for a kiss.
Best job
ever.